He was snoring. Peacefully. As if nothing in the world could touch him. As if he hadn't just shattered the one person who loved him most. She stood over him in silence, barefoot, trembling. The cold metal of the gun heavy in her hand, just like the truth she'd discovered only hours before. He gave her a disease that would never leave her body. He looked her in the eyes and swore he would never cheat. And now, he was sleeping like a baby. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She pulled the trigger. And the silence of the night was broken forever. Before the silence. Before the shot. Before the blood soaked through the sheets, there was a love story. Or at least, what she believed was one. Camille Jordan met Eric Sanders on a rainy spring afternoon in Atlanta. She was 25, fresh out of grad school, working her first job as a medical billing specialist. He was 31, charming, smooth-talking, a barber who knew how to make anyone feel seen. And that day, when she walked into his shop to ask for directions, he looked at her like she was the first woman he'd ever laid eyes on. They said love at first sight doesn't exist. Camille would have argued otherwise. Eric offered her a seat while the rain came down hard. They talked for 20 minutes like they'd known each other for years. By the time she left, her heart was racing. And by the time he texted that night, "Made it home okay, beautiful?" She knew she wasn't just flattered. She was falling. Fast. Within 6 months, they were living together. A year later, married. And from the outside, they were the picture of black love. Beautiful couple. Strong connection. Laughter, photos, inside jokes, vacations, everything looked perfect. But perfect doesn't last. Especially when one person's love is real, and the other is playing a role. Camille believed in building a future. Eric believed in hiding his past. He told her he'd left the streets behind. That the flings were just part of his past, and she was the one he wanted to grow old with. But the truth? Eric never stopped chasing what he thought he deserved: women, attention, and control. Even after marriage, the cracks started small: late nights at the shop, text messages he'd quickly delete, whispers from mutual friends. Camille wanted to trust him. God, she wanted to. She gave him chances. Asked the hard questions. Took his hand and said, "Just tell me the truth." He looked her in the eye every time and lied. And she believed him. Until the day her body told her the truth her husband never would. It started with silence. Not the kind that drapes itself over a home in contentment, but the kind that seeps into cracks, one you only notice after it's done its damage. Camille had known silence before. In the early years of their marriage, it had been the comfortable pause between shared glances, the warm quiet after laughter faded. But this silence was heavy. It pressed against her chest like an invisible weight. Eric was still there, but not really. He'd come home smelling faintly of cologne she didn't recognize. He'd kiss her cheek like it was a habit, not a desire. Their conversations turned to scripts, rehearsed lines, performed out of obligation. She started to feel like a ghost in her own home. Camille noticed everything. She always had. The way his phone never left his side, even in the shower. The way he angled it away when texting. The increasing frequency of his extra hours at the shop, how his workdays bled into nights with vague explanations and no calls to say he'd be late. When she pressed gently, never accusing, just asking, he'd smile and say, "You know how it gets, babe. Walk-ins don't wait." That smile used to calm her. Now it made her skin crawl. She tried to talk herself out of the suspicion. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe she was just tired. So she distracted herself with routine, her morning runs, her skincare rituals, tidying up the house, making him his favorite tea before bed. Camille clung to those acts of love like they were lifelines, afraid to admit that she was the only one still trying to hold on, and then came that Wednesday night. Eric had passed out on the couch, television still playing some action flick he'd picked. His phone buzzed quietly against the cushion. Once. Twice. 3 times. Camille stared at it. She didn't want to know. She told herself that. But something deeper, stronger, darker, told her she needed to. Her hand moved before her mind gave it permission. She unlocked the phone easily. He hadn't changed the passcode. Not yet. The message lit up the screen. Can't stop thinking about last night. You make me feel alive again. From Jay. She froze. Her hands trembled as she tapped into the thread. A photo. A close-up of someone in lacy lingerie. Voice notes. Inside jokes. Flirty banter that quickly escalated to raw, explicit exchanges. The messages weren't new. They stretched back nearly 8 months. 8 months of lies. Eric had told another woman she was the piece in his storm, the one who made him feel seen. He had called Camille that once. Years ago. Camille's heart was pounding so loud she thought it might wake him. The bathroom floor was cold beneath her knees as she crumbled there later that night, phone still in hand. Her tears were silent, not out of restraint, but because she had no energy left to cry out loud. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was humiliation. How could she not have known? But it wasn't over. A week later, Camille visited her doctor. She'd been feeling strange, lightheaded, sensitive, fatigued. She suspected pregnancy, or maybe anemia. What she got was worse. A positive STI test. One that was incurable. Lifelong. Camille left the clinic with trembling fingers, the envelope of test results clutched to her chest. She sat in her car, numb. The world outside kept moving, people shopping, kids laughing, traffic buzzing, and yet her life had just split in 2. Eric did this. He infected her. With a virus and a betrayal so deep it rewrote her DNA. Camille didn't scream at him. She didn't storm into the barbershop. She didn't even cry again. Something inside her had hardened. There were no more confrontations to be had. He had made his choice. And now, she was making hers. She spent the next few days in silence, observing him that he still touched her. Still kissed her forehead before work. Still called her, baby. He had no idea. That's what stung the most. The ease with which he deceived her. She began to plan, each movement was deliberate. She deleted her browser history. She hid the test results behind the lining of an old purse. She rehearsed in her mind what she would do. What it would feel like. And then, it was time. She stood before the bathroom mirror one final time, test results in one hand, Eric's phone in the other. She studied her reflection. Her eyes didn't look like her own. They looked like someone else's, a stranger with too many scars and too much rage. Camille had once loved Eric so much she could imagine dying for him. Now, she couldn't imagine letting him live, because she hadn't just been betrayed. She had been broken, rewritten, and left to rot in silence while the man she gave her life to handed his body and soul to another woman. She wasn't going to cry, she was going to end it, not with a fight. Not with a warning. But the same way he had hurt her, quietly, intimately, and in the dark. The day was normal. That's what made it terrifying. Camille made breakfast just like always, eggs scrambled soft the way Eric liked, coffee sweetened with too much cream. He kissed her cheek on the way out the door, said he had 2 back-to-back appointments and might grab drinks with a client later. She nodded with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. He didn't notice. He never really looked at her anymore. The plan had been slowly forming in Camille's mind for days, every detail sharpened by silence and spite. She didn't want to humiliate him. She didn't want a public confrontation or a divorce that dragged through courts. She wanted him to feel what she had felt, pain. Violated. Powerless. She had never touched the gun before. It was Eric's. A small pistol he kept, just in case, stashed under the bed in a lockbox. She knew the code. Of course she did. For years, she'd protected his secrets, so it only made sense that she knew where he kept them. That night, Eric came home late. Reeking of cheap perfume and lies that he mumbled something about staying out too long. Camille didn't respond. She just nodded again, helped him into bed when he kicked off his shoes, slurring slightly. He was tired. He didn't notice that her eyes weren't blinking. That her hands weren't shaking. That she didn't say goodnight. She waited until his breath slowed. Until his body stilled. Until he was deep into the kind of sleep where dreams blur with nothingness. Then she reached under the bed. The gun felt heavy in her hand. Cold. Real. Her fingers curled around the grip as if they belonged there. She didn't hesitate. Didn't think, she just raised the gun, and fired, once, twice, then again, and again. 11 shots in total. The neighbors would later say it sounded like fireworks, too many, too fast. But to Camille, each shot was its own heartbeat. A note in a song she'd been forced to write in silence. She emptied the clip, not because she had to, but because stopping felt like surrender, and she wasn't surrendering anymore. The room filled with smoke and the iron scent of blood. Eric's body twitched once. Then nothing. She stared at him, this man who'd kissed her on their wedding day, who had promised forever, who had given her a disease and a wound she couldn't name. That he didn't look like her husband anymore. That he looked like what he was, a stranger she had loved too long. Camille sat on the edge of the bed, gun still in hand. She didn't cry. Didn't panic. Her mind was a strange, quiet place. She didn't know if she was going to call the police, or just sit there until morning. The shot echoed through the quiet of the early morning. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots, a sound so sharp and sudden it jolted even the dogs from their sleep. By the time the police arrived, the street was wrapped in flashing red and blue lights, casting long, pulsing shadows across Camille's front yard. Inside, Eric lay in bed, lifeless. The bullet had entered the back of his head, ending everything in a second. There was no struggle. No screams. He never even opened his eyes. Camille sat in the living room, hands folded in her lap, the pistol placed neatly on the table in front of her. She didn't run. She didn't try to hide it. When the officers approached, she looked up with a hollow expression and said, "I shot my husband." Her voice was calm, too calm. Detective Michelle Warner was assigned to the case. A seasoned investigator with years of homicide experience under her belt, she'd seen many domestic crimes, but something about this one felt different. The absence of panic. The quiet resolve in Camille's voice. The clean scene. When Warner asked why she did it, Camille simply handed over two things, a manila folder with her test results, and Eric's phone. The evidence was irrefutable. Infidelity. Lies. And the infection. It painted a picture of not just betrayal but irreversible harm. Warner, though trained to be objective, felt something twist inside her. She wasn't just investigating a murder. She was unraveling a woman's breaking point, but what Camille didn't expect was what followed. The media storm. The story exploded. Wife murders husband in his sleep. Barber killed by jealous wife. Talk shows speculated wildly. Social media split down the middle. Some saw a monster. Others saw a woman who'd endured too much. The prosecution charged Camille with first-degree murder. But her defense team argued mental and emotional duress. Highlighting the trauma of betrayal, the STI, the emotional manipulation, and the complete lack of remorse from Eric. The trial was set. And Camille would soon find herself not only on trial for murder, but at the center of a national conversation about betrayal, trauma, and how far a person can be pushed before they snap. When the story broke, it was everywhere. Wife shoots husband in sleep after learning of infection from affair. Tragedy behind the perfect marriage. The headlines were loud. Salacious. Invasive. But what caught everyone off guard wasn't just the crime, it was who committed it. To the outside world, Eric and Camille were the golden couple. No kids, but full of love, or so it seemed. They hosted neighborhood cookouts, attended Sunday service without fail, and were often spotted holding hands at the local farmers' market. Eric, with his clean fade and warm smile, was the kind of man you trusted with your child's first haircut. Camille, graceful and polite, was always checking on elderly neighbors or bringing over peach cobbler, just because. So, when the news hit, the neighborhood reeled. Mrs. Langston, who lived next door, was the first to speak to the media. "I still don't believe it," she said, her voice cracking. "They looked so perfect together. I mean, Camille always smiled when she saw him. And Eric? He doted on her." But looks deceive. The local news station interviewed customers from Eric's barbershop, many of whom described him as upbeat, family-oriented, and in love with his wife. Some were shocked. Others, less so. One customer said, "He was cool, yeah, but there were times he looked distracted. Like something was eating at him." Reporters camped outside their house for days, trying to piece together the puzzle of a woman scorned, and a man who had betrayed one vow too many. Social media exploded with debates. Some painted Camille as a monster, others as a woman pushed past the brink. "She didn't have to kill him," one comment read. "She should have just left." But another went viral. "Women are always told to forgive and move on. But what happens when enough is enough?" Friends of Camille came forward in bits and pieces. One mentioned how withdrawn she had become in recent months. Another admitted she had asked questions about STIs, almost in passing, during a conversation that suddenly felt like a cry for help in hindsight, but Camille wasn't talking. Not to the press. Not to the public. She let the silence speak, and in that silence, the world tried to make sense of the crime behind closed doors. The walls of her cell were cold, but not colder than what had settled inside Camille: grief, guilt, rage. None of those words felt strong enough. What she carried wasn't just an emotion. It was a storm. It was everything and nothing all at once. Some nights, she would lie awake staring at the ceiling, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. And other nights, she'd break. Silently, alone, curling into herself like a child with no one left to protect her. She was angry at Eric, but she missed him too. She hated what he'd done, but she hated what she had done even more. The betrayal had set fire to her heart. But now all that was left was ash. The other inmates kept their distance. Camille didn't speak. Didn't ask for anything. She moved through her days like a ghost. In the silence of the cell, memories came back to her in fragments: his laugh, the way he used to kiss her forehead, the promises they once whispered in the dark. Now those memories felt like knives. She wondered if he ever thought about what he was doing. If he ever imagined how it would destroy her. If that night, when she stood over him with a gun in her shaking hands, he even realized the woman in front of him was the one he broke beyond repair. Camille wasn't a monster. But she was broken. And in that jail cell, surrounded by concrete and consequence, she began to understand the difference between justice and vengeance. She hadn't wanted revenge. She had wanted to feel seen. Heard. Loved. And when that was taken from her, when her health, her dignity, her marriage were all violated, she didn't snap. She shattered, and when the pieces fell, she didn't know how to pick them back up. So now, she just existed. One breath. One day. One moment at a time, and each one felt heavier than the last. The courthouse was silent as Camille Monroe entered in shackles. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing like fireworks, their voices slicing through the cold morning air. "Camille, do you regret it? Did he deserve it? Why didn't you just leave him?" She didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. The truth had already been written into her bones, and there were no words left to say. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. Strangers, journalists, even some of Eric's barbershop clients showed up to witness the unfolding of a story that had already become a public obsession. Camille's eyes scanned the room once. There were no familiar faces, no family, no friends. Just her attorney, a public defender who spoke in gentle tones but couldn't hide the weight of the case he carried. The prosecution painted Camille as calculated. Cold. A woman who waited until her husband fell asleep to unload a gun into him with no hesitation. They showed photos, of the body, the bed, the blood. They let the jury sit with the horror of it all. They wanted it to be unforgivable, but the defense had its turn, too, and when Camille took the stand, the courtroom fell still. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for sympathy. She told the story plainly, how she had supported Eric's dreams, how the marriage had begun to rot in silence, how she found the messages and then the diagnosis that changed everything. The courtroom shifted. People leaned forward. I wasn't trying to kill him, she said, voice breaking just once. I was trying to survive something I didn't have the words for. I was trying to hold together a version of me that didn't exist anymore. The prosecutor pushed back. You had a choice, he said. You could have walked away. Camille looked up, eyes locked on the jury. I thought I did everything right. And in return, I got a death sentence. Just, not the kind you think. 3 days of testimony. 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came down hard, guilty of second-degree murder, not premeditated. But not forgivable. Camille stood quietly as the sentence was read, 25 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 18. That she nodded once. No tears. No breakdown, just a quiet acceptance that the rest of her life would be lived behind bars. As they led her away, the judge paused. Mrs. Monroe, he said, this court acknowledges the pain you endured. But violence is not justice. It is only more pain. She didn't respond. What could she say? The court had spoken, but the story wasn't over. Her name was Jayla Thomas. 27. Stylish, sharp-tongued, and the kind of woman who never stayed in one place for too long. She was a regular at Eric's barbershop, came in for her little brother's cuts and somehow found herself tangled up in a relationship with a married man. Jayla never thought it would go that far. It started out as fun, she would later tell police during questioning. Flirting. A little attention. I didn't even know he was married at first. But the messages told a different story. The ones Camille found on Eric's phone, pictures, dates, hotel receipts, painted months of intimacy. A secret life. And Jayla? She wasn't just a side fling. She was the one he vented to when things with Camille got tense. She was the one he whispered promises to after hours. She knew he was married. And stayed. When the news of Eric's death broke, Jayla disappeared. Deleted her socials. Changed her number. Went completely off-grid for nearly 2 weeks. But the media didn't need her to speak. Camille's trial dragged Jayla into the spotlight whether she liked it or not. The prosecution subpoenaed her. Reluctantly, she showed up, nervous. Makeup thin. Hair pulled back like she was trying to shrink into herself. I didn't know it would end like this, she said on the stand, voice trembling. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. But her involvement, while central to the affair, didn't cross into the crime itself. She hadn't known about the STI. She hadn't sent threats. She wasn't in the house the night Camille pulled the trigger. There was no legal case against her, just public shame. She was labeled the mistress who broke the marriage. She lost her job. Her apartment. Her safety. Online forums tore her apart. Death threats flooded her inbox when she reappeared. A local women's advocacy group protested outside her office when she tried to get a new job. In the end, Jayla left Atlanta entirely, moved north. Changed her name. Some say she's working a quiet desk job now. Others say she spiraled after the trial. But one thing was certain, she got to keep her freedom. Camille didn't, and Eric never got a second chance. In the end, this wasn't just the story of a marriage gone wrong. It was the unraveling of a woman who gave everything to a man who gave her betrayal in return. Camille wasn't just a wife. She was a woman quietly suffering, carrying the weight of infidelity, humiliation, and a painful diagnosis in silence, until silence turned into something deadly. Eric wasn't just a victim. He was a man who made choices that fractured trust, infected love, and ultimately cost him his life. And Jayla? She walked away scarred but breathing, a reminder that sometimes the mess left behind doesn't fall on just one person, it spreads. This story holds up a mirror to marriages that look perfect from the outside, to wounds we hide behind smiles, to the things we tolerate until they finally consume us. It's a brutal reminder that betrayal doesn't always end in heartbreak, sometimes it ends in blood. Call to action: if you or someone you know is facing emotional abuse, betrayal, or health-related trauma in silence, don't wait until the breaking point. Speak up. Seek help. You're not alone. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Camille's shoes? Share this story to spark the conversation about love, betrayal, and the dangerous silence in between. And if you want more true crime stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because the truth, sometimes it hides behind a wedding ring.